The story begins with two guys and some weird creature. This guy is Kim Soo-hoo, but in this world he is known as Lloyd Frontera, and this is a story of him, a regular civil engineer, changing a whole civilization. He looks at the widespread field and tells his bodyguard Javier how this was all money while laughing menacingly. A few years ago in a village, the system's voice informs him that the absolute being chose him as a random wish candidate. From now on, he would be a character in the novel Blood and Iron's Night. Lloyd remembers reading the novel last night. It took him a minute before he realized that he was not drunk, nor it was a dream. He really was in another world. But more important than that, he wonders why he was reincarnated in the middle of a field. The system informs him that his jaw was distorted due to him sleeping outside, in the cold. Lloyd gets annoyed by its way of speaking. He was trying to find out which character was he when someone calls him by his name. This was none other than the protagonist of the novel Blood and Iron's Night, Javier Azrahan. Lloyd was surprised at how similar he looked as he was described in the novel. As the story progressed in the novel, Javier's reputation as a swordsman spreads all over the continent. However, in the beginning, he was just an anonymous knight of Baron Arcus Frontera, and the name of the eldest son of the Baron of the Frontera was Lloyd Frontera. Lloyd freaks out knowing he was reincarnated as the trash son of the Lord of Frontera. Javier was happy that he was self-aware about himself. At the Frontera residence, Lloyd acts like he lost his memory of the last night. Javier told him that after getting drunk, he destroyed the bar and fell to the ground on the way home. He was still cold because the floor was not heated. While Javier was going to report this incident to the Lord, Lloyd asks him if their family had a lot of debt. Javier says that it was nothing new, everyone knows about it, and he leaves after that. Lloyd knew all the contents of this novel as he read all the chapters last night. That included Lloyd's fate too. In the beginning, the Baron was trapped by a swindler. Then he lost all his properties and estate, and at last they end their life. Lloyd was a heavy drinker. He died after throwing up blood. He realizes that his situation was still the same even in this new world. The next morning, his mother finds out about his destroying the bar and asks him to apologize to the owner. Lloyd felt it was unfair because it was not him who did it, but he still was ready to apologize. The two were bewildered by his reaction. When Lloyd goes out, the people of the village hide after seeing him. The system told him that he disgusts the villagers. Lloyd asks Javier why he was following him. The Lord had ordered him to guard the people from him. He wonders if he should clean his image of being a rascal first. But his first priority was to settle the family debt so that he could live the rest of his life in luxury. He searches for any cheat skill that could help him. There were two skills. The first one was the scumbag passive skill. This can make other people frown. The second was the troublesome drunkard. If you use this skill, you'll become a dog. Lloyd was annoyed at his trash system's uselessness. They arrive at the bar and Javier asks him if he lied about apologizing. Javier could see that he was acting different from the last night. Lloyd apologizes to the bar owner, but seeing him acting formally all of a sudden, he gets even more scared. So Lloyd apologizes like a jerk, but the bar owner was still not happy. Javier told him that he had destroyed his bar which he put his blood and sweats to build. He would not be satisfied until he receives compensation. But Lloyd's family had too much debt already. Not only that, the bar owner's mother was also struggling due to the freezing winter. Suddenly a flash of thought crosses Lloyd's mind. In this world, there was no concept of a heated stone slab floor. If he could construct it in this world like he did back in the military, and the construction that went on all day and night, he could pay for his family's debt. He turns back to the bar again, and his first journey to change this civilization begins. His RP system was also boosted. Every time he improves his relationship with key characters, he could gain relation points. Javier was a key character, so Lloyd sees what his impression was of him. It was -30. To increase his favorable impression of him, Lloyd compliments him saying he was handsome, but that results in decreasing it even further. He decided to put that aside for now and focus on the task ahead. He gives a contract paper to the bar owner to sign it, but he was clearly suspicious. Due to his past behavior, his reliability was at rock bottom. When it wasn't working, he used his bum image and acts like trash again. The owner immediately signed the contract after that. Javier confronts him for threatening a civilian into signing a contract and asks him if was trying to scam them. They debate for some time and Javier wonders how he was able to talk that well. Lloyd promises to make them smile because that smile would be the foundation of money-making. He dug the soil in a certain way, built the structure with the lumber, and applied the red clay soil from the riverside for the exterior, but it was too much work for his weak body. Javier compliments him saying it was fast, but it took a whole week to make this. Javier was really surprised that he was keeping his promise to the bar owner, and for the first time in his life, he really made something. And more important than that, where did he learn this? Lloyd had no energy to go on. Javier asks him about the instructions and cuts down the wood into even planks in just one strike. This was to be expected of the soon-to-be swordmaster, but Javier was shocked because instead of thanking him, Lloyd gives him even more work. But he was also curious about the end result and decided to help him build it quickly. And after a hellish physical labor, the room was finally ready. He also put his brand logo on it. The bar owner and his mother couldn't believe it. For them, it was like magic. Javier was beyond surprised to see them smile, just like he had promised. Seeing them smile, Javier's favorable impression of him increases by 2 points, which gives him 36 relation points. And this is how he managed to execute his first contract. Although the woods were expensive, but that was not important. This model house was merely for promotion. The next day, a bunch of people gathered there to experience the magic with their own eyes. Even though they found it a marvelous invention, Lloyd wasn't getting any more contracts because no one trusted him. Just then, Lloyd's father Arcus Frontera, the Baron, also comes there and ordered him to explain what he was doing. During the dinner, the Baron asks him if he was deceiving the citizens. Lloyd answered him like in the past Lloyd would and assured him that he was doing no such thing. While he was leaving, the Baron asks him if he was doing it because of the family debts. He assured him that he would take care of it, so he didn't have to worry about it. This was not the first time someone had said this to him, and he knows that it was a lie. Lloyd assured the Baron and regrets not doing the same thing in his past life to his dad. As he was leaving, he sees 2 loan sharks heading towards the Baron's room. They were forcing him to pay them the money back by selling items in this mansion. The last day of payment was in the 5 days. Even though they were before the Baron, they were rude to him. Lloyd was also hearing all this, and this gave him a perfect idea. Last night, when Lloyd was wondering where he should spend the RP point, the system told him that he could spend them to hone his skills and acquire new skills based on his knowledge. The first skill was basic measurement, and the second was basic design. He spends all his coins on these 2 skills, and the results of the skills were amazing. He didn't need GPS to measure, he could do that just with his eyes. He could also design easily now. The only problem was the manual labor. He wishes he had some kind of summoning skill that he could use to summon modern machines from his world. The system told him that it was possible to summon. This skill is fantasy species random draw. Diverse characteristics, diverse skills, a loyal fantasy partner. But the cost of 1 draw was 50 RP and he only had 1 left. He wonders if he would summon creatures like in the fantasy novel. But in order to do that, he needed to earn points from the key characters. And now in the present, one of the sharks offers the Baron a place where his wife and maid would sell at a good price. The Baron was shocked to hear that. Just then, Lloyd comes there and asks him for the invitation later. They start insulting him for being trash. Lloyd states them the law which states that without an invitation letter, one is considered trespassing. He orders Javier to cut off their arm. They threaten to see him in court, but he already knew what the law was. They run for their life without the money. The Baron says to them that it wouldn't calm the situation. Lloyd gives him the down payment he received from the people. The Baron asks him if he was extorting money from the people, to which Javier replies that he would make sure that Lloyd keeps his promise to the people. The Baron sees that Javier seems to trust him. Javier asks him how he knew about the law. He found out about the law from Javier in the novel. After the death of the Baron and his wife, the 2 loan sharks wanted to dig for the corpses and sell them. And that time, Javier stated the law to them which protects the right of a noble. After he said that, he sliced the 2 people's heads. And when he was put on trial, he was found not guilty. The favorable impression of the Baron towards him had increased by 6 points, giving him 60 RP. This was going exactly how he had planned. At night, he starts the random draw. He was fascinated by the magic circle, but it was kind of small for a huge fantasy beast like he had hoped. The magic circle worked and a small hamster beast comes out of the circle. His name was Podong and all he says in Podong. Lloyd calls him a failure, which makes him cry. Lloyd could understand what he was saying. Podong gives him the Podong manual. It says to feed him red sunflower seeds, which makes him huge for 12 hours, and the blue sunflower seeds bring him back to his original size. Every time he uses the pair of beans, he would lose 1 ARP. Lloyd wonders if he would become as big as a normal human, but much to his surprise, he was over 10 feet tall. He could do excavations, ground hardening, and other heavy machinery stuff. The next day, Lloyd was motivating the army members to do labor work. But they were not listening to him and were not in the mood to work. They were looking soulless. But he had already expected this reaction from them, and he also expected the Frontera barony senior knight Newman to appear. There were 3 knights in that estate, and that person was Newman. Under him, there is Bayern and Xavier Azrahan. At the beginning of the novel, it was Bayern and Xavier who stayed loyal until the estate collapsed. This person was the first ever to betray and leave Baron. He was also the one who sold the information about the Baron to the swindlers. Lloyd couldn't let this man be the senior knight. Newman confronts him for using his troops for dirty work. He accuses him of using them for his personal gain. To piss him off even more, Lloyd insults him. He goes as far as throwing dirt at him. When Newman was at his limit, Lloyd gaslight him into having a duel with him. The duel was in 1 month. Xavier asks him if he was confident that he could beat him. Lloyd throws tantrums at him for being stupid enough to think that he could be a warrior who was on Junior Sword Expert, and whose nickname was Manaheart. Xavier was so annoyed by him that he almost cut him down. But he figures that Lloyd was not doing this without thinking. Lloyd asks him to teach him how to use a sword, but Xavier immediately denies, saying it would be even more dangerous if a scumbag like him learns how to use a sword. Lloyd offers to treat his insomnia in return. Xavier was shocked because no one knew about this. It was in the novel. In the novel, the rank of the knights is divided into 4 levels: Junior Sword Expert, Intermediate Sword Expert, Advanced Sword Expert, and Sword Master. Xavier, who is soon to become a Sword Master, the reason he couldn't sleep is because of his superhuman nerves that are too sharp. It is called Sword Master Syndrome. Xavier agrees to give him a chance, but he was confident that he wouldn't be able to cure his insomnia. He keeps on going about how many treatments he had done to treat it, but was unsuccessful. But he falls asleep almost immediately after Lloyd recites a chapter from his civil engineering book that makes anyone sleepy. In the novel, he had accidentally fallen asleep while reciting the magic techniques. The next morning, as he promised, Xavier helps him train. He gives him hard tasks, thinking he would give up easily. But Lloyd predicts what he was thinking, and mocks him for thinking that he would give up that easily. He was actually really tired and wanted to quit, but this much was nothing compared to when he was in Korea. He had no family. He opened his eyes in his cramped apartment every morning. He moved bricks to the 4th floor of the villa every day, and loaded trucks every night just so he didn't starve to death. He was hanging on somehow. Compared to that despair, this was nothing. Seeing how sincere he was, Xavier decided to teach him his sword technique. Newman explained the situation to the Baron, who asked him to go easy on his idiot son, but he was planning on killing him during the battle. And if the Baron made too much fuss about it, he was going to kill them as well and move to a bigger place. He had already planned out everything. 1 month had passed. It was the day of the duel. Lloyd was using a shovel as his weapon instead of using a sword. The Baron wonders if he was just messing around, but Xavier remembers that he might be serious. The way he has been living the past month, basic exercises during the day, construction work, and then sword training during the night until he passes out. The duel begins. Lloyd stands in a half-ass posture. Newman thinks he was mocking him and attacks him in anger. Much to everyone's surprise, he blocked his attack. Newman thinks he got lucky and attacks again, but this time too he blocked his attack. Xavier was wondering what kind of technique he was using. It was as if his technique improved by many years. The technique he was using was the modern close combat technique, the bayonet charge, which he learned in the military. On top of that, his shovel has also many uses. He could use it to attack and use it as a shield. Xavier still wasn't sure if he was joking or not. Now he uses the basic sword technique learned by Xavier. Newman was bewildered at how he got this strong, but Lloyd still had another skill up his sleeve. While training, he earned many RP from Xavier and his parents. He used those points to unlock a new skill called digging. While in effect, his synchronization with the shovel increases drastically. But Newman wasn't planning on going easy on him anymore. He starts accumulating his mana and uses his technique Mana Heart to attack him. For an ordinary person, it would take at least 5 years to develop a Mana Heart. For someone like Lloyd who lacked talent for the past 10 years, it was impossible for him to block such a sword attack. Newman was planning on smashing his skull with this attack. The Baron and Baroness were terrified for their son. But then a miracle happens and they see that Lloyd managed to block his attack. Not only that, Newman was feeling as if he was getting weaker. Lloyd was using Xavier's Mana Core technique, which made him the strongest man in the novel. It was Azrahan's core technique. Newman realizes that his mana got absorbed, but it was already too late. Lloyd hits him so hard that he could see his tooth flying away into the air. Newman was on the ground. Everyone was speechless and bewildered. The Baron announces him the winner of the duel, but even after that, Lloyd didn't stop and kept on beating him while the Baron was screaming at him to stop. They try to stop him forcefully and he calms down for 5 seconds. He starts beating him again. Everyone was thinking that he lost his mind, but Xavier could see his calm expression. It was as if he already knows what is going to happen. 15 days before the duel, Xavier was shocked when Lloyd suddenly asked him to teach him Asrahan's mind technique. He had never told anyone about this, and the technique wasn't even complete yet. When he asked him how he knew about this, Lloyd replied that he was sleep-talking, but he could see that he was lying to his face. He couldn't teach him even if he wanted to because it wasn't complete, so Lloyd offers to help. Xavier doesn't question him anymore and listens to what he had to say. Lloyd told him to concentrate the mana separately that he absorbs from the outside. Otherwise, his own mana heart would repel outside mana, and then make the outside mana circle around the mana heart. When Xavier thought about this, it made so much sense. And then, he was able to complete the Asrahan mind technique that he had been worried about for a long time. After the first attempt, the circle he could create succeeded up to 3. If you train it more, it's possible to reach 4 or even 5 circles. Xavier's favorable impression increased by 5 points. After he helped him complete his technique, he teaches it to Lloyd on the surface level. Xavier already knew that with that kind of ability, he would surely win. The Baron couldn't let him tarnish the knight's reputation. Lloyd told him to look under his tablecloth. He finds a bunch of letters that were being exchanged between him and the swindlers, all of their sensitive information and how to fabricate a fake document. It was all there. Newman was wondering how he found the letters. The letters were found by Xavier later in the novel. He made Podong do the rest. The Baron was kind and wouldn't execute him. He was a kind man. But Lloyd knows being a kind leader isn't equal to being a good leader, so Lloyd suggests they put a rat on his head and banish him from the estate. Everyone was murmuring about how a rat couldn't injure a senior knight. They think he was letting him off easy as a warning and agree with him. But Lloyd knew about his nature, how he would definitely betray them again. He throws Podong at him, but what happened next, no one expected that. Pudong eats the bean and gets huge in front of their eyes and crushes Newman. This permanently solved the problem of dealing with this rotten man of the estate. The next day, Podong was excavating for spreading road around the estate. The engineering unit was also fired up today. This estate was going to skyrocket in popularity. Xavier's suspicions were now at its limit. He asked Lloyd how he knows all of this and if he really was their Lloyd. Lloyd had already known that this day would eventually come when Xavier figures out that something was wrong. And if finds out that it was some imposter, he wouldn't hesitate to draw his sword. So he uses his passive technique of being persistent. He just says that he was studying in secret all this time, and he could use summoning magic at such a young age because he was also a genius just like him. He kept being persistent, and in the end Xavier had no choice but to take his word. They hand over the road construction work to Knight Bayern, and left for a remote place in Rudinia Estate to collect some debt. In a bar, real estate scammer Thords was frustrated because he lost in gambling. His escort warrior threatens to leave him if he doesn't pay him on time. There were many who were looking for him, so he was planning to hide for now. Just then, Lloyd barges into the room and introduces himself to them. The bodyguard asks Thords if he should kill him, but he told him to run away. They jump through the wall and try to escape through the back alley, but Xavier was already waiting for him. Lloyd had already anticipated this would happen. The bodyguard gets angry seeing such a young guy drawing his sword at him and getting ready to attack him. In the novel, after the Baron was dead, Xavier searched for Thords and had to face his bodyguard. It was his first time facing someone with black magic. He struggled against gravity magic, but that was in the novel. The bodyguard attacks him, which Xavier tries to block with his sword. But the black mana disperses and surrounds him, giving the bodyguard the chance to use his gravitational magic. In the novel, when he fought the bodyguard, he was merely a senior swordmaster, but now he had a mana heart with triple circles. Xavier nullifies his magic in just one swing. Seeing his strongest magic getting cancelled in just one hit, the bodyguard runs away saying it was not in the contract. Xavier was furious at Thords for scamming the Baron and was about to cut off his legs. Lloyd intervenes and stops him. Xavier wonders if he was being sympathetic towards him. Lloyd offers to forgive him if he signed the work contract, but most of his payment would be taken as debt repayment, and the payment would give to him 520 years later. Xavier changed his thought. He was not sympathetic at all, he was just trying to get free labor. Thords refuses to sign the contract, so Lloyd threatens to drag him in court. He immediately signed the contract after that. They found some money from him, enough to pay a few months of the debt interest. But Lloyd was planning on using that money to invest in labor because 30 men weren't enough. But he was not sure if people would believe in him and apply for the job. But much to his surprise, there were a lot of people who were applying for the job. He was building the ondol, the heated floor house, at a cheap price. One of the guys thanks him for the ondol that he made for his son, and told him that his relative at the nearby estate was also asking for the ondol. This is what Lloyd's plan was from the start, to go international so he could raise the construction fee. Xavier gets disgusted with his ugly face again. Lloyd told Xavier that the way they were consuming resources to construct the ondol, so this mountain would become bare one and there won't be any trees. That's why he was going to leave the old method. He was going to dig up the bituminous coal that was at the end of the road that they were making, and then he was going to sell it at a high price to the other estates. They wouldn't be able to resist after they experienced the ondol once. Xavier thinks how greedy and mean his actions were, but he told him that it was the only way to pay their debts. But Xavier warns him that the Baron wouldn't just sit still after hearing this. Even the other estate's Baron had their eye on the bituminous coal, but they couldn't dig it because the ground was too weak. That's why he was going to modern-era excavation technology. But what they didn't know was that there was a giant ant nest inside the coal. Lloyd summons a whole high-brand department, but it was in his imagination. He was hoping he had a skill like that. Due to the Newman incident, he had collected a bunch of favorable points, which he invested in leveling up his base design skill and basic measurement skill. He leveled them above level 10. With manual labor, it would be almost impossible to dig the coal mine. He uses his intermediate measurement skill. He could now scan up to 5 meters, which would help him find the best route. Podong was ill due to road construction. He had no choice but to summon another beast. He spends his last few points in the summoning, and this time it needed 20 more RP than the last time. This time as well, he gets a beast the same size as Podong. Her name is Belle, and she could also change her size like Podong. Weeks later, we see what her skill was. Step 1, Giant Belle eats up the dirt in front of the shield equipment, and then she could turn that into steel rods, which Xavier cuts into even pieces. In the next step, they build a structure that will support the ground, and then repeat the process all over again. They would have lost their consciousness due to the lack of oxygen if it wasn't for the connected pipes. Xavier told him to rest while the workers were doing their job, but he didn't want to be like the men in charge in his world. He scans the mine ahead and could see the bituminous coal. The workers' morals were also high. Just then, they hear something from the other side of the mine. The mine wasn't supposed to collapse due to their shield support. Lloyd scans again and he sees a hole that wasn't there before. When he tries to take a closer look, a giant ant attacks him from the other side. Xavier, who is right behind him, manages to block its attack, and Lloyd took care of the rest by smashing its head with his shovel. Something like this wasn't even mentioned in the novel, so it caught him by surprise. But he realizes that there was no time to relax because there must be a whole army of them, and he was right. There were many more ants. He ordered all the workers to run outside while Xavier tries to shield them from back. Lloyd was trying to figure out the optimum way to deal with this situation. There were probably thousands of them. If they were to get to the estate, it would be all over for them. There was no way Xavier could stop all of them. They needed dynamite to collapse the cave that they had just created. Xavier slaps him and snaps him out of it and told him to come up with a plan before he runs out of energy. Lloyd thinks all about his surrounding, about the ant's nest, and soon he comes up with a plan. He told Xavier that they were going to attack head-on and enter the ant tunnel. It sounded absurd, but there was no time to question his decision. Lloyd and Xavier charged straight into the ant tunnel. The Baron also hears about the emergency. Knight Bayern was planning on collapsing the cave to prevent the ants from coming outside. Inside the cave, Xavier and Lloyd were completely surrounded by ants. It was a good thing that they were not going outside. But Xavier was almost out of breath due to lack of oxygen in the cave. The situation was very tense. In this chaos, Lloyd had to find what he was looking for soon. He was searching for a methane gas layer that was somewhere in this underground. Coal is inhabited by methanogens. Because of that, methane gas layers are lurking all over the mineral veins. If he could find that, he can blow these ants away along a large area. He scanned the whole cave and finally found the layer. He starts digging the ground while Xavier protects him from the ants all around him. As if the situation wasn't worse already, the queen ant also comes there. She was much bigger than the normal ants. Lloyd asks him if he could handle her, which he immediately denies, but there was no other way but to fight their way out. He uses his mana heart at its limit and holds his ground against the ant while taking advantage of that time. Lloyd manages to get to the methane layer. The gas starts coming outside. Lloyd told Xavier to run towards the entrance and throws the flame into the pit. The queen ant was still chasing them. Soon enough, the whole cave starts to engulf in flames. A huge blast occurs which kills the queen ant and the rest of the ants as well. Xavier saves Lloyd from the blast but passes out due to the explosion. Although they had managed to kill the ants, their problem was still not over. The path ahead of them also collapsed, and they were running out of oxygen. The wall was 5 meters thick, but there was no other way but to dig through that before his oxygen runs out. Xavier's vision was blurry, but it was clear enough to see Lloyd trying his hardest to get them out of there alive. His favorable impression of him increased by 6 points, making his current RP total 157 points. He asks the system to search for the knowledge that can develop skills. Even after the Newman duel, he had been continuously training for the Asrahan mana technique. For normal people, even if you work hard, the development of a mana circle is uncertain, but he could raise the level in no time with his RP. Unfortunately, he didn't have a mana heart, but he manages to get 1 mana circle. He bets everything on leveling up the skill as much as he could. His mana amplification increases drastically. He gets 1 more mana circle, but he was now all out of RP. He gets 2 more skills that maximize his energy for a few minutes. His skill power outburst allows him to amplify his mana for the next 3 minutes, and skill energizer allows him to not get tired for 10 minutes. He uses the skill energizer to dig through the wall. He desperately tries to at least make a small hole for the oxygen to pass, but before that, the 10 minutes were over. Then he uses his skill power outburst and puts his last remaining life into it. He was so close to getting out of there when his oxygen runs out and collapses. When he was thinking this was it for him, he hears a rumbling noise. It was Podong who dug through the remaining wall. Lloyd gets the oxygen and gets up again. The Baron and the rest of the army also come inside. They see Lloyd, who was carrying Xavier on his back and was extremely exhausted. Due to his tenacity, he gets another power mode skill. He finally collapses, after seeing his father. The next day, everyone was praising Lloyd's bravery, how he stayed inside the cave with Xavier and got rid of all the monster ants. When Lloyd wakes up, he gets the message from the system that people's favorable impression of him had increased. He got 500 points as a result. It has been 2 weeks since the monster ants incident. The workers were now looking at Lloyd as their hero and were working hard. They were looking for the ant nest. Xavier asks him why he does these dangerous jobs himself, when he could ask the soldiers to do it. His answer was that it needed to be him, so that if he spends a lot of money, no one would stop him. Xavier's favorable impression of him was about to increase, but it stopped. They arrive at a dead end, but when Lloyd scans the cave, it was also up ahead. When they dig through that, they arrive in the ant's nest, where they find an orc who was trapped. Xavier was about to kill him, but Lloyd sees it as an opportunity. He treated the orc and found out that his name was Hirosh, and he was the son of an orc tribe leader. Hirosh offered him anything he wanted, so Lloyd asks for 120 orcs to work in his mine, but he immediately refuses it. Orcs are warriors, they only follow orders from a warrior, and Lloyd wasn't a warrior. The orcs in the wild are required to bring the head of a monster ant once they become an adult. Hirosh made a mistake by going to the ant tunnel and got paralyzed. Lloyd sees a way to use him. He congratulates him on becoming the adult orc, but Hirosh didn't catch any monster. Lloyd lies to him saying they caught the queen ant together, but he doesn't remember because he was paralyzed. He told him a whole story about how bravely they defeated the ant together. Hirosh was now ready to give him 120 orcs. They travel for a week and arrive at the tribe, but the tribe leader Akuche refuses to give him his men. The reason was they had to hunt 3 shifts a week. If they don't eat the meat right after hunting, they would lose their muscle, and that could lead to the collapse of their civilization. Xavier also suggests that he gave up, because for them, protein and muscle were everything, meaning if there was a way to stop the meat from going bad even after a few days, they would lend their men to him. When they first arrive at the tribe, the shock from their hug alone was strong enough to kill someone. If Lloyd gets his hands on 120 of them, his work efficiency would increase by 10 folds. There was one more thing: they celebrate Hirosh's victory by doing workouts, and they were using some very expensive things to do their workout, not knowing how precious those things were. So Lloyd made a contract with them. He would make stone-cold storage and better gym equipment for them. In return, he would get 120 orcs and all the expensive items. Xavier asks him about the stone-cold ice, to which he replies that it was the same as how royals use crystal magic to preserve their food. A stone cold storage was just that, but without magic. And to do that, they needed granite stone, which was very hard to require. He didn't have dynamite with him, but he had someone as powerful as dynamite. Xavier could see that he was going to be used again. It was one of the main episodes of the novel Blood and Iron's Night, the City of One. Namaram was trapped inside a magical barrier. Inside the city, there were thousands of refugees that Xavier needed to save. At that time, Xavier was already at the level of Swordmaster, and had the 4th mana circle inscribed on his mana heart. He had no choice but to watch the refugees' mana being sucked out. He was desperate to save them, and the skill of lethal moves was created without knowing it. Protect the main mana heart with 1 mana circle, and the remaining 3 circles collide. The blast from this collision was magnificent. After that, this became a technique that represented the Knight of Iron and Blood along with Azrahan Mind technique. He explains the theory and told him to try this technique. Xavier asks him to answer him how he knows about that technique, but he says that he just thought about that while lying to his face. But nonetheless, if it works, this would improve his sword technique drastically. He exactly does what he had told him to do, protects the mana heart with 1 mana circle and releases the blast. He successfully manages to create the blast on his first try. He doesn't show it, but he was thankful to Lloyd, and his favorable impression of him now was at -11. After that, the construction work went smoothly. He didn't even ask for it, but the orcs who were gym maniacs helped them anyway. Now the work would be 5 times faster. Now all they needed was ice and insulation. But it had already been 3 weeks, but the 5 workers were still not back with the material. Meaning, they had an accident. Xavier stops him from tagging along with him this time because they didn't know what would they face. But Lloyd had already told him that he was responsible for the workers' well-being. They went in search of the soldiers and find the insulating gloves. Xavier informs Lloyd that he was feeling something weird from the canyon. It was subtle, but something was definitely there. Just then, Lloyd remembers about an incident in the novel and asked Xavier to hurry, as their soldiers might already be dead. They follow the trail of their soldiers and find a cave. This place was targeted by Xavier at the very beginning of the novel. It was the hideout of a dark mage called Rufalin. Lloyd was pissed at him for laying his hands on his soldiers. Xavier told him to follow him while Lloyd tries to stop him. Xavier steps on a magical trap, but Lloyd saves him. He scolds Xavier for being so careless. In the novel, Xavier steps into the trap and enters the dungeon with an already injured body. Xavier senses the mana in the atmosphere and finds where the mana was condensed. That way, they manage to avoid any other traps. Xavier's suspicions grow even more thinking about how he always knows what is going to happen. He wonders if he had powerful mana that he couldn't sense, but he puts all of his suspicions aside for now and focuses on saving the soldiers. The Black Mage senses one of his traps had been destroyed, and figures they were here to save the soldiers that he had kidnapped, but his preparation was almost over. We see that the soldiers were still alive. He throws one of them into a magic circle that was connected to hell. He was about to sacrifice him when Lloyd comes there and stops him. The mage was bewildered to see them pass through the thousands of traps that he laid all the way. He traps both of them inside walls and releases a magic spell to get them to sleep. But sleeping medicine doesn't work on Xavier as he still hadn't treated his insomnia yet. And Lloyd had already dug halfway through using his skill energizer, then signals Xavier to do the rest. He blasts away the rest using his technique, shocking the Black Mage. Seeing them escape unscathed, the mage summons the strongest monster he had made. Its skin was like it was made out of steel. Before Lloyd could tell that its weakness was its leg, Xavier had already charged. He just developed a new skill, cutting blast wave. He swings his sword at the target and midway, uses his blast technique to power up his sword speed. Using this skill, he cuts down the monster in just one shot. Lloyd was speechless because there was no such skill in the novel. The mage gets on his knees and apologizes to Lloyd. He agrees to give all of his artifacts for the inconvenience. When Lloyd asks him what he was trying to do, he told him that he wanted to resurrect his dead wife and child. He was made of a prestigious lord. He was living happily with his family until the lord tried to take his wife. When he tried to resist him and they ran, the lord persuaded them and killed his family. But that sad story of his still doesn't justify what he had done to hundreds of families. Even if he manages to somehow resurrect his family, they wouldn't accept a killer like him as their family. Lloyd leaves him be and starts leaving the dungeon. In the novel, Xavier had forgiven him, but he killed hundreds of humans again and fought with Xavier again and again. But the reason he was showing his back to the mage because he knew what was going to happen. The mage attacks him from behind, but before he could reach Lloyd, Xavier chops his head off. This was the best way to deal with him. In his past life, when he used to work at the construction site, a senior used to harass him for no reason. Lloyd was thinking if he does what the guy says, he would eventually stop harassing him. But it never did. When he had enough, he punched him again and again. After he was done beating him, he realizes that he was done for. But to the contrary, the guy was now afraid of him and stopped messing with him. There are tons of cases of killing, assaults, and other crimes that keep happening in Korea. Lloyd comes to the conclusion that sometimes violence is the only way. Criminals should get punishment befitting of them. While coming back to the village, Lloyd takes their bags even though they refuse to do it. Right now, he was a leader that they could depend on. Everything was ready now. The chamber to preserve meat was ready, but it was not as cold as he had promised. Hiroshi thinks to himself if he had brought a scammer. Lloyd told him to worry because they still haven't used the ice yet. Xavier asks him how he was going to make the ice. Lloyd goes on and on about how they should have an entrepreneurial mindset and never give up in the face of difficulty. But Xavier could see through him. It was the first time when Lloyd had no plan for something. Xavier asks him if he was really going to scam the orcs. Lloyd assured him that he would find a way somehow. He thinks of all the possibility that he could use to make ice. He thinks hard about magic structures and use them to his advantage. He didn't have much mana like the royal mages, so he couldn't just make a bunch of ice from thin air. But there was something he could do with the little mana he had. He makes Podong and Bell bring water from the nearby lake and put it in a big container. He was going to use Azrahan mind technique to absorb all the mana inside the water. If he manages to absorb most of the head, the water automatically would turn into ice. But it was not as easy as he thought it would be. Xavier was also impressed that he wasn't just bluffing, he was actually trying. After trying it for a long time, he finally starts absorbing the heat. When the chief comes inside, he was baffled to see such an enormous ice cube. Now that they didn't have to worry about the food being wasted, they could send their orcs to the estate. But they don't believe in contracts like humans. They were helping him because they think of him as their friend. Lloyd managed to bring a whole orc time to his side and gets 100 bonus points from the system. And just like that, their long journey to recruit 120 orcs comes to an end when they arrive at the Frontera estate. Everyone was terrified to see those huge chunks of muscles roaming around the city. Even the Baron, who already knew they were coming, froze after seeing them in person. He didn't expect to get any RP from the civilians, but the story of him defeating the Dark Mage and rescuing the soldiers spread like fire. Now he had over 900 points. Now it was time to see what the Dark Mage had. He had many artifacts, but what truly caught his attention was a book. He immediately runs to the mine and calls for Thords. The contract of him working for Lloyd for 502 years was like a joke, but now he had a recipe to revive his core after he dies and make him work for 502 years. Lloyd threatens to cheer up and was happy for him because he could repay his debts now. Inside the mansion, a maid told Lloyd that the loan sharks were here to meet the Baron again. Hearing their names again brings a menacing smile to his face. They were offering to lower the interest rate of the debts if he gives control of the mine to them. As they were forcing the Baron, Lloyd also enters the room. They immediately show him the invitation card. But this time, he was here to make a deal with them. But they didn't want to hear him because of his behavior last time. But that makes Lloyd angry, making Hiroshi get involved as well. They were terrified to see him. Lloyd calms him down. He told them that if they wouldn't hear him, it would hurt him, and if he gets hurt, Hiroshi would tear him to pieces. Just like the last time, they run for their life this time as well. Lloyd hands over all the contract papers to him and assures him that the way mining and the Odong work was progressing, they would be able to pay their debts in no time. They only had one problem. The orcs eat 10 times more than a normal human, so food expenses would be a problem. As expected, the orcs were great miners. They had to forcibly remove one of the orcs from working. Their productivity was 10 times higher than what he had expected, and their stamina and muscle strength were beyond imagination, and they didn't want any monthly charges as well. Feeding all of them was not an ordinary problem. Lloyd suggests the Lord increase the tax charges on the people, but the tax charge was already too much for them. Baron couldn't just increase as he pleased. Lloyd advised that they had to just make them earn more, and to do that, they were going to turn the abandoned land in the north into a field. But turning a Marez wasteland into a farm was not something easy. After all, it has been hundreds of years since this land was abandoned, but Lloyd was going to come up with something no matter what. He needed a structure for the rainwater to drain. He makes a small structure of the Marez and worked on it day and night. He He failed many times, and this has been going on for 21 days now. Xavier asks the Baron if he should stop him, but the Baron didn't want to come in his way. He has always thought of him as useless punk, but now seeing him working for the estate made him proud of his son. And finally, after working for 1 month non-stop, he finally found a perfect structure to drain the rainwater. He could almost feel the taste of money. Although it was a hellish month, it was nothing compared to when he used to work all night and a part-time job on top of that. His special experience had a great influence on his skill in design. His design skill had leveled up, and now he could do the same work that he had been doing for a month in just a few hours. He lashes out at the system for not giving this skill to him sooner, but the reason he got this skill was due to the experience he got during this month while working non-stop. The next, he orders Podong and Bell to scoop all the water, but it was too much for just the two of them. That's why he was going to draw another summon. This time, he had to pay 100 RP every time he draws, and the requirement for summoning increased by 1.25x. He didn't need anything with a special ability. He just needed it to be like Podong and help in scooping the water. The summon was complete, and this time the creature named Hippo came out. When he sees the manual, he finds out that he could not get bigger even after eating the seeds and wonders if he had failed this time. He asks the system to draw again, but he could draw only 1 time a day. The others scold him for being too harsh on him and protest against him. Lloyd gives him a chance and asks him to show his skill. His skill was 1 shot. He could drink water 4 times the size of his stomach. All this time, Lloyd was lucky enough to get summons according to his needs. Hippo starts drinking the water and starts growing in size while drinking it. He grows and manages to drink a large portion of water in one go. He became even bigger than Podong and Bell combined. And he was not done just yet. He could drink even more. Because of Hippo, the construction of the vertical drainage method started the next day. First, Hippo will remove all the water from the wasteland and spit it out in the river. Remove the grass roots and plant remains from the ground. And then blasting. Holes will be drilled in the ground and bamboo poles will be inserted. Next, build a more sophisticated bank using Lloyd's skills. In 10 days, 1 section of the wasteland was complete. All the workers were fired up under the leadership of Lloyd. Xavier was wondering what kind of miracle it was. The wasteland really turned into a rice field. Then the realization hits him and he starts wondering why he, a knight, was working on a farm. As he was wondering about this, Lloyd gives a job again to plant the seed, which he couldn't refuse again. The Baron also comes there to see the miracle his son had just created. The people of Frontera was admiring Lloyd's effort and how he was changing their life, due to which, he gets 450 plus bonus points. The seed had started to grow into plants, and Xavier also started to enjoy farming. Lloyd told him that they needed to install a water wheel to prevent the wasteland from submerging into the rainwater again. Just then, a convoy could be seen coming their way. This was Viscount Racona, who is situated to the north of the Mares wasteland. They order them to stop the construction as this land belonged to Viscount Racona. He had abandoned this place, but now that it had become fertile, he came running to claim it. The northern part of the wasteland really did belong to Racona, but that was until now. Lloyd insults the knight who was speaking for Racona, saying he shouldn't talk when 2 nobles are talking. The guy was confused until Lloyd introduces himself as the oldest son of the Baron. Racona had heard about his indecent behavior and demanded to talk to his father. Lloyd ignores his request and indirectly insults him, but Racona didn't understand and his knight had to explain it to him. As he was about to get angry, Lloyd starts stating the law to him. There were 3 articles. In short, the law was, if a wasteland hasn't been used to cultivate or constructed for a long time, in this case more than a century, the one who successfully cultivates in the field becomes the new owner of the wasteland. Racona couldn't find any loopholes and had to give up on the land. Now Xavier realizes why he had told him to plant the seeds. Lloyd gives the Viscount the first corp and a gift and makes them leave his land. After that, Lloyd became a hero of Frontera. They start praising him, but he gets pissed seeing them slacking off instead of working. As summer passes, autumn comes, and so does the rain. He had used the simulation 100 times, but he needed to check it until the end if Mares Wasteland was really usable land. The morning comes and the Mares wasn't submerged in the rain. The water wheel worked. He gets many bonus points. His skills also level up, and people's favorable impression of him also increased. Now he had more than 1,300 points. Now that this was done, they moved to the next step. On the other hand, Viscount Racona was feeling angry and frustrated about losing his land. Half of it was his land that was being used to lay golden eggs. His advisor also told him that there was nothing they could do for at least 2 years. When he couldn't win ethically, he makes a plan to use any means necessary to get back to them. He asked for the workshop supervisor. The next morning when Lloyd woke up, he wasn't feeling so good. He had a headache, but he couldn't just rest while his workers work. Xavier also hasn't woken up yet. When Lloyd wakes him up, he also had the same problem. Lloyd knew something was wrong. He asked the others in the mansion. They had the same problem. The same problem was in the whole village. Even the cows weren't drinking the water. Lloyd figures it had something to do with water. The strongest weapon that Lloyd had was the power of information. But due to the incidents with the ants, he found out that there are information that he didn't know. While digging for information on the Viscount Racona, Lloyd found out about their main source of income was a mysterious fruit that they used to dye dresses. And Lloyd was familiar with the use of that dye and finds out that Racona was behind it. But it was not a secret. Racona sent his senior knight to blackmail the Baron. If they don't give them Mara's wasteland, they wouldn't stop the dyed water. The Baron threatens to go to the royal court, but it would at least 2 years for the result to come. Until then, they would have lived in this constant pain. While he was leaving, Lloyd comes in, smashing the senior knight into the door. When he confronts him about him, Lloyd called him a parasite who could talk. The knight's pride was hurt and he challenges him to a duel. The result of the duel was the same as it was with Newman. He totally overpowered him and was beating him constantly, even though he had already given up. The Baron was also not stopping this time. This was the new side of the Baron that Xavier was not familiar with. He beat him until his anger had been relieved. The senior knight goes back to his estate all beaten up and gets scolded by the Viscount. But the Viscount thinks that this was perfect. They would file a lawsuit against them, but Lloyd already knew what he was thinking and decided to make the first move. First of all, they would make a water reservoir as a temporary solution to the water problem. Hippo, who was on level 3, now could help them with that. But their main and more sustainable goal was to construct a canal from the West Mountain Water Lake that was in their territory. The construction would be very hard, but it would indirectly make them 10 times or even hundreds of times more than the construction cost. It has been 1 month since that day, and we see the Viscount, who was frustrated for some reason and didn't know how all of this happened. Just then, his supervisor told him that the Baron's eldest son wanted to have a talk with him. He said he was there to solve their problem. Lloyd comes inside and mocks him, saying he looked pale. He told him that he could save his dyeing workshop. As Viscount had expected, it was Lloyd who destroyed his dye workshop. For the last month, they dug the ground from Capua River to their estate, trimmed it, and buried it. The Viscount gets angry and is told to come to the main point. While they were constructing the water pipe, they encountered a ginormous valley standing in the middle of the pathway. They had no choice but to build a Roman opus cementitium. To find the limestone as a resource, they did blasting work. But because of that, limestone got buried at the bottom of the valley. That valley water was the water that flows in the direction of Viscount's workshop. The limestone ingredient turned his fabric into a poop color. The Viscount threatens to file a lawsuit against him, but Lloyd states the same thing that they had said to the Baron last time. It would take 2 years for the lawsuit's decision to come. Until then, no one would even remember about his dye workshop. While Lloyd was leaving, the Viscount threatens him, saying he had connections to the royal court, and he would make him pay double for the loss he had made him. Xavier asks him what was the meaning of this meeting. All he did was make him even more angry. He also knew many nobles. If a fight break out, it would be only more money loss for them. Lloyd understands his concerns and told him to just wait and see. After 1 more month, we see Viscount Racona on his knees before Lloyd, begging him to save his dyeing workshop. His friends in the royal court couldn't help him because they knew they couldn't win. The only choice he had was to request Lloyd to revive his workshop. He didn't want an apology. He wanted him to sign a contract with him on the water supply. When the Viscount sees the conditions, he was bewildered. He confronts him, saying it doesn't make sense to put a price on water. On top of that, it was so expensive. To which Lloyd replies that he was the one who taught him to put a price on the water. After the contract was signed, he gives the papers to the Baron, who was also shocked to see that much money. He could easily pay his monthly debt and still have enough money left. Lloyd told him that the Viscount was kind enough to sign the contract. Xavier knows that he was doing all this for the estate, but at this point he had started to look like a devil. Also, the contract with the Viscount didn't specify a deadline, meaning he was going to eat him up for generations. The Baron told him another good news. Count Cremo was giving a good price for the treasures that he got from the Orc tribe. Lloyd wonders why he was buying it at such a good price. They wanted to make a huge bronze statue in the ocean. We see the trade city of Cremo. Count Cremo was looking outside the window into the ocean. Something was coming out of the ocean. It was the monster Giga Titan. Xavier goes to report to the Baron that they would be departing for Cremo Estate in 2 weeks. Seeing him worried, Xavier assured him that he would be at Lloyd's side all the time. The Baron told him how he would have given the Mares in fear if it wasn't for Lloyd. He was saying that he was not a competent leader. Xavier reminds him how he adopted him when he found him on the streets. But the Baron says he didn't have the motivation to do something like Lloyd does. Xavier thinks to himself that his only motivation was money, but decided not to tell him. The Baron assigned Xavier to be Lloyd's escort instead of keeping an eye on him. Lloyd might have revived this estate, but Xavier could never be like that human. When Xavier was just a kid, Baron asked him what he wanted to become, to which he replies that he wanted to become a knight to protect him. Baron states how Xavier survived the harsh winter by himself. He would definitely become the strongest knight ever. The Baron gifted him a wooden sword that he had carved himself, but that wooden sword was broken into pieces by past Lloyd. He could never like a person like him. He goes to Lloyd for the engineering lullaby while thinking that he needed to hate him, but for some reason, he keeps seeing him as a different person. When they both were fast asleep, a man enters the room to kill Lloyd. It was Viscout's senior knight who was fired from his job because of Lloyd. But before he could kill him, Xavier wakes up and stops him from killing him. The next morning, Xavier asked him why he was targeting him. Lloyd explains it to him and told him that he was expecting something like this would happen. Xavier asked him if he already knew this and why he didn't prepare for this, to which he replies that he didn't need to prepare for anything as long as he was next to him. He further goes on to remind him how a guy whose hometown was destroyed due to a monster invasion survived all winter on his own. There was no one more trustworthy than him. He couldn't have come this far if Xavier wasn't there to protect him all the time. Xavier's long-term resentment towards him was relieving slowly. Xavier answers all of this by just saying, "Wow." Due to their improved relationship, the system rewards him with 320 points. The water construction was almost done. Tomorrow, they were departing for Cremo. On their way to the Cremo estate, because Lloyd couldn't ride a horse, he rides with Xavier and falls asleep onto him. Xavier gets annoyed and hits him. They argue over if he really hit him or if he just imagined it. Lloyd gets annoyed as well and orders him to teach him how to ride a horse. As they were arguing, the system shows him a notification. The rumors of Lloyd making the first water supply in the continent was spreading like a fire. He gets 600 bonus points for that. He starts laughing, which makes Xavier think that he had gone mad. The journey to Cremo City was long, was freezing, but they finally arrive at the City of Trades in several weeks. Count Cremo welcomes him and introduces himself. As Lloyd was about to introduce himself, the Count starts praising his appearance and how he looked like a noble. But it turns out he had mistaken Xavier for Lloyd and was complimenting him. When Lloyd tries to correct him, Count Cremo yells at him for interrupting them even though he was just a servant. The system starts laughing at him. They explain the situation to the Count and he starts laughing as well. Lloyd's pride was crushed while Xavier was trying his hard not to laugh. The Count blames him for having a face of a servant. The Lord of Cremo, the trading city, Count Cremo. He was a pretty important character in the novel. Xavier, who was wanted after cutting the heads of the loan sharks and was in hiding, was eventually arrested by the Count's hand in Cremo. But with the exchange of a few words, the Count knew Xavier was a capable man. After that, he played several roles as a strong supporter. The Count told him why he wanted to build the statue. Giant Giga Titans started to appear recently in the ocean, and because of them, the merchant were afraid and slowed their trade with them. Lloyd had read about it in the novel. Due to the Titans, the traders stopped trading with them, and eventually Cremo collapsed. But he didn't know about the solution because the novel's season was complete and there were no more chapters. When he first came to this world, his power was that he knew about everything. But things that didn't happen in the novel were being carried out now. The Count was planning on putting the mermaid statue because mermaids were the species that had dominated the ocean, and they were the Giga Titan's biggest enemy. He was thinking of scaring them with the statue. But he had already given up because if he piles up enough soil to put the statue, the ships wouldn't be able to sail freely. But as promised, he was still going to purchase their treasures. But Lloyd said that he would help them build the stand for the statue without getting in the way of the ships, of course. He was planning to build a giant pillar of cement that would take up much space. He goes to look around the ocean and to find if the ocean floor was strong. His face was in pain because of the cold water. Lloyd confronts Xavier for being happy seeing him in pain. After their banter, Xavier asks him if it was really possible to pile up from the ground. Lloyd assures him, saying it would be possible with the power of cement. This world still hasn't invented cement. If he manages to invent cement, it would be revolutionary. As they get off the boat, the daughter was the Count comes there with a letter in her hand. She was here to give it to the successor of Frontera. Lloyd was flustered a little seeing her all of a sudden, but she also mistakes Xavier for Lloyd and gives him the letter, which he shamelessly accepts and acts as if nothing happened. Lloyd confronts him about accepting a love letter just like that. Xavier didn't know what the problem was when he finds out that he'd never gotten a love letter. He pities Lloyd, which makes him furious. Xavier sincerely tries to cheer him up, which enrages him even more. He starts working on his project to earn his money quickly. The Count calls him and Lloyd answers him in anger. He calms down after seeing it was the Count. He brought all the things that Lloyd had asked for except for one thing, the volcanic ash. It was not something you could get anywhere. You have to go to the volcanic mountain, which was 1.5 years away from there, even if the Count goes himself at full speed. Lloyd was planning to make Roman cement, which lasts more than 2,000 years. But now he had to give up on the Roman cement and shift to Portland cement, the modern cement that we use today. He only knew basic ingredients, but he had never made cement on his own. He has no other choice but to try everything, every proportion he could. Even after 130 samples, he was nowhere near the end result yet. Podong and others were also worried about seeing him in this state. They try to get his attention, but he keeps ignoring them. When they kept pushing him, he lashes out at them. Suddenly he remembers his dog, the only family he had in his past life. But she also passed away, leaving him all alone in that world. He didn't spend enough time with her, which he regrets to this day. He decided that they were more important than any project. He takes them for a walk and apologizes for treating them as machines and using them as tools. But they didn't feel that way. Their relation levels up from close friends to family members. This unlocked a new skill for Podong, which cost 500 points. Lloyd didn't even have this in his mind. Belle asks him to buy her the skill. He doesn't care if it is a useless skill if Belle wants it. Her previous skills leveled up and she gets a few skills. One of them, which was a volcanic eruption. Now his cement problem would be solved. The next day, there was a huge blast in the mountains near the city that terrified everyone in the city, including Count Cremo. It was Lloyd and the others who were experimenting with Belle's new skill. The eruption worked, and he could see the main ingredient to make cement when he scans the smoke. He orders Xavier to praise him for his achievements, but Xavier wasn't listening as Lloyd forgot to tell him to close his ears. Now that the cement problem was solved, they get on with the construction work immediately. First, he creates and equips Belle with a giant diaper to filter out volcanic ash. A 5-layer sieve is attached to the end of the diaper to filter out the ash, and then Belle's volcanic skills activate. Everyone, including the Count, was speechless, as it was beyond the common-sense level of construction form skills they'd never seen or heard before. The Count was curious how he handles everything. If he managed to construct the pillar, he would inform the king, as it would be a waste to keep a talent like him in the corner of the countryside. Once the cement materials have been gathered, the second step was to create a caisson for pouring cement. And soon, the caisson was also ready. The water inside the caisson is removed with one shot of hippo. The third step, drive the friction poles into the ocean floor inside the caisson with the help of Xavier. Lloyd was waiting for him to complain again. Xavier asks him why a knight like him was doing labor work. Lloyd emotionally blackmails him, saying if he didn't help him, he wouldn't be able to pay their family debt. After completing the regular training of Xavier, crafted a reinforcing bar frame with bellow steel grunts. Finally, pour the long-awaited cement. Then the caisson is disassembled after the cement has hardened. Marine artificial ground complete. It was only 50 centimeters higher than the surface of the sea. Now if they put the mermaid statue over there, it would appear floating on the water. The Count was still in disbelief that he really made something like that. The same evening, they put the giant mermaid statue on the platform, and it was a success. There was a celebration party where all the novels were gathered on the ships. Lloyd was complaining about having to wear such an uncomfortable outfit. Xavier points out that it wasn't the first time he was wearing something like that, making Lloyd change the subject. The Count introduces the nobles as the main contributor to this project, and this time again they ignore Lloyd thinking he was just a servant, and gathered around Xavier. Lloyd wasn't envious or anything. The only thing that was annoying him was that sympathetic look that Xavier was giving him. Count Cremo starts laughing again and introduces them to the real Lloyd Frontera. While they were having fun, in the distant ocean someone was watching them. It was the Giga Titan. It sees the giant mermaid statue, its sworn enemy, and that enrages it. It saw that the mermaid was alone and decided to kill her. This had totally opposite effect. Instead of running away from the statue, it was coming straight for it, while they were busy celebrating. Xavier was quietly drinking when he feels an ominous feeling coming from the far in the sea. Lloyd asks him why he was so silent. Xavier told him that something was approaching the ship at high speed. When Lloyd asks him how large it was, Xavier told him that it was at least twice the size of this ship, even larger than full-size Hippo. Lloyd immediately realizes what it was and why it was coming to them. Lloyd informs the Count about the Giga Titan approaching them. The Count asks his knight, who was also suffering from Swordmaster Syndrome, but he was not as sensitive as Xavier. He told the Count that he didn't feel anything. The Count told him that the Titan has never come this far in all these years. There was no reason for it to attack now. Just then, they noticed the mermaid, and they figured out why it was coming here. The Count orders the men to raise the anchor and get away from the mermaid statue. They quickly start raising the handle, but Xavier informs them that they were too late. Lloyd orders him to cut down the anchor. He jumps into the sea to cut it down. Lloyd throws the podong to free the ship from the statue. Xavier uses his blasting cut and cuts down the anchor, and podong also breaks the rope. After cutting the anchor, Xavier sees that the Titan was already there and it was way too fast. They scatter away the ships from the statue, but they were still not far enough. The Giga Titan comes out of the water, destroying the ships. The Titan hit the statue so hard that it went flying all the way to the city. Xavier comes out of the water using his blasting technique and saves Lloyd was thrown in the air by the impact. There were too many people that were drowning. There was no way they could save all of them one by one. Lloyd brings out Hippo and orders him to do one shot. Hippo starts drinking all the water along with the people. Xavier informs Lloyd that the monster was heading towards the city and that they needed to hurry. But he sees Lloyd going the other way from the city. He confronts him about where he was going, to which he replies in anger that they were out of their league here. There was no way they could defeat a monster like that. He orders Xavier to jump on the boat and not try anything crazy. Xavier was in disbelief. The Count was trying his best to save as many people as he could, and Hippo was a great help in saving them. Xavier was just standing there, disappointed. Lloyd keeps ordering him to jump on the boat because it was none of their business. They were here for trade and money. He told Xavier to let the troops of the city handle the situation. Xavier thinks back to the times when he showed tenacity and bravery and risked his life for the people. He was someone Xavier could rely on. But no matter what he does, he was the same Lloyd Frontera, the same person who was selfish. Xavier's favorable impression of him decreased by 5 points. Xavier couldn't just let the people die and told him that he was going back to the city. Lloyd yells at him and orders him to not go or he would die, but Xavier didn't listen to him. He uses his blasting technique and used his sword as a surfing boat to reach the city quickly. The Titan was already destroying the city. The whole city was in chaos. It sees the mermaid statue and was going to finish the job when the troops start shooting cannons at the Titan. But the cannons weren't even leaving a scar on its body. It only makes it more angry. The Titan also shoots a water wave at the watchtower, which completely destroys the tower. As the Titan was about to crush one of the citizens, Xavier comes there flying just in time and attacks him using his strongest technique, blasting. Much to his surprise, he couldn't even scratch its surface skin with his strongest attack. The Titan notices him and starts attacking him. It throws him away, and while he was in the air, it launches the water strike again, which Xavier could dodge, and receives the hit directly. He was injured and was already overpowered by it. He already knew that he wouldn't stand a chance against such a monster. But he was relieved that it took the bait and was focusing on him, so that in the meantime, the villagers could escape the area. On the other hand, Lloyd was still going away from the battle. He was trying to convince himself that it was the right decision. Of course he feels bad because the city was being destroyed and people were being killed, but it was not his place to fight that monster. He was just a constructor, not a knight. But no matter how much he tries to convince himself, his consciousness doesn't allow him to just leave Xavier and the people in need. And more importantly, if the city would be destroyed, he wouldn't get his construction money. He brings out Belle, and she uses her eruption technique to get to the city faster. He was not going to let a lobster-looking monster take his money from him. On the other hand, Xavier was still struggling to face the monster. He thinks that like any other creature, its weakest spot should be its eyes. He continuously uses his blasting skill to get closer to the monster, while the monster kept throwing the water shockwaves. But Xavier manages to reach its eyes and KS it. He was shocked when he found out that its eye was just as strong as the rest of its body. While Xavier was busy wondering about this, the Titan attacks him using its whiplash. As Xavier was midway in the air, he had no way of dodging its attack. Just then, Hippo Head butts the monster and pushes it. Hippo jumps back to Lloyd and turns back to its original form. Lloyd was finally there with his shovel. He was pissed at the monster for destroying his money-making machine of a city. Xavier finds in perfect moment to attack while it was showing its neck wide open. He tries to cut it with a blasting wave, thinking the neck would be the weaker part. But even though he lands a perfect hit, he still wasn't able to cut down its neck. There was no way to win against this thing as it had no weaknesses. But even though he was in so much predicament, he was still feeling relieved somehow. It was because Lloyd was here, and he would definitely come up with a plan to defeat that thing. 2 minutes before coming here, Lloyd was circling around the Giga Titan on Podong to look for any weaknesses. He freaks out even more when he sees that Xavier's attacks weren't working at all. He wonders why it was so strong and what it was made out of. Just then, he wonders if he could use his basic measurement on the living being, and it actually worked. He could see what that thing was made out of, and how its molecules were layered, making it as strong as a bulletproof vest. When Xavier attacks it again, Lloyd sees something gathering to its horn. It was gathering the impact forces which were dealt by Xavier to its horn. That horn gathers the energy and releases it. If they could get rid of that horn first, it wouldn't be able to use its attacks. He uses the simulation mode to see if they could cut it down. He sees where it was storing the water and wonders if he could destroy it from there, and sure enough, they could destroy it from that angle. Xavier asks him what he should do. Lloyd gives him signs to cut down the horn. Seeing him making random hand signs, Xavier thinks that he had already lost his mind. Lloyd screams at him to cut down its horn first. Just then, the monster attacks Xavier, which he manages to avoid. He knows that only cutting horns wouldn't be enough, but he trusts Lloyd and goes for it without a second thought. As he was nearing its horn, Lloyd informed him that using his blasting technique would be enough to cut it down. Xavier asks him what he should do then. Lloyd told him that instead of crashing the mana circles, he needed to circle around them around the mana heart at maximum speed and then crash them. It was easier said than done. Xavier attacks it using his blasting, but it wasn't enough. Then he starts spinning the mana circles at maximum speed and crashes them again and again, making it a chain of mana crashes. The flames of Xavier's sword turned blue, and it was looking like a chainsaw of flames. It was only Lloyd's theory, but it was actually working. For others, it would take forever, but for Xavier, it was a piece of cake. This was the mana chainsaw's technique, and with the help of this technique, Xavier started cutting down the horn. The Titan tries to attack him while he was cutting it, but Podong comes in the way and stops its attack. And finally, Xavier manages to cut down the horn, making the monster screech in pain. But they were not done yet. Lloyd gives Xavier the angle where he was the weakest. If he attacks at the right angle, they would be able to take this monster down for good. As Xavier was about to release his blast, the Titan lays down to the ground, smashing Xavier, who was still below it. Only his sword could be seen escaping the crash. Lloyd didn't take account of this and was just stunned. Terrified for Xavier, he screams his name. A few seconds before, as Xavier was about to attack it, he sees the monster trying to crush him. But he was determined to kill with his next shot and gambles on his life. But before that, Podong comes to his rescue and takes him out of the way just in time. Podong scolds him for being reckless. Xavier didn't understand what he was saying, but he knows what he meant. So they decided not to die until they take down this giant Titan. They believe in Lloyd's plan and were ready to bet their life on it. When Lloyd first discovered its weakness, he came up with many plans to defeat it. When Plan A didn't work, he decided to use Plan A plus Plan D together. He rides on Podong and ordered him to take him to the designated area. Lloyd told Xavier that the Titan considers him his biggest enemy at the moment. He told him to take the monster to the eastern forest. All this time, Lloyd was buying time for their main plan to be ready. 15 minutes before coming here, the Count was devastated and blamed himself for putting the statue and making the monster angry. Lloyd comes there and told him that he would buy him some time. Meanwhile, they were to fix the statue as soon as possible. He was going to use its obsession with the statue against it. On the other hand, Xavier was trying his best to lure the Titan into the forest, but he was barely surviving against it. He was at his limit, but for the sake of the citizens, he keeps on going. The Giga Titan was terrifying and was destroying the forests as well. As Xavier was about to pass out, Lloyd screams and told him to lure the monster towards the statue. We see that he was carrying the mermaid statue, which was barely holding onto ropes. The Titan seized the statue and took the bait as he wanted. Lloyd told him that he was going to lure him. Meanwhile, Xavier was to attack at its weakest spot. Xavier told him to tell him the complete plan when it started. The monster took the bait, and now it was following the statue instead of Xavier. The whole situation was complete chaos. They were barely alive at this point. While it was distracted, Xavier comes down to its weak spot. He knew it was his one and only chance and puts all his force into his next blasting cut. The explosion was massive and could be seen from afar. While falling down due to exhaustion, Xavier sees that he only destroyed its outer shield. He needed to attack once more, but he had used up all his mana. He blames himself for being this weak, and now the citizens would have to pay for it. But Lloyd told him that he did his part. Now it was his turn, and told him to leave the rest to him. Xavier almost lost consciousness and was falling down directly, but Podong catches him. Lloyd was running towards the target while screaming his lungs out. His adrenaline was at an all-time high, but he wasn't sure himself if it was even possible to defeat that thing. He might have succeeded in luring it in the forest, but there was no guarantee that it wouldn't go back to the city. Worst of all, it has intelligence. It could cause even more destruction in retaliation for summoning a mermaid. As if the situation wasn't worst, he and Podong were both at their limit. Podong launches Lloyd at his order. As he was getting closer to the target to attack, he was still not sure what he was going to do. Earlier when he was planning, some plan required him to enter the fight himself. He would have to blast it, but to do that one needed to have 3 circles. He only had 2. He asked the system to level up his Azrahan Mana Heart, which was at level 4 double circle, and he needed to go all the way up to level 10. The leveling up required a lot of RP points, but he had no other choice. He spends all his points to level up. But at level 9 he ran out of RP points. He needed 60 more points to level up to level 10 to achieve the 3rd circle. He had no plans to jump into the fight when he couldn't achieve the 3rd circle. But here he was, hanging onto the Giga Titan. While he was thinking of ways to somehow injure it enough so that it couldn't move, Xavier's favorable impression of him and his affection for him increased, giving him enough points to level up to the 10th level and achieve the 3rd circle. After he achieved the 3rd circle, he reminds him of the rules. He needs to protect his heart with 1 circle and collide with the rest of the 2 circles to create the blast. As he was getting ready to attack, the monster kicks a mountain and a stone hits Lloyd in the head. He forgot what he was doing and what the rule of the circle was. Instead of protecting his heart with 1 mana circle, he collides with all 3 of them at once, creating mega blasting so strong that when he attacks the Giga Titan, it was destroyed inside out. The blast lifted the giant monster into the air and destroyed it in pieces. The blast was strong enough that it could be clearly seen from the city. It was even bigger than before. The Giga Titan was not moving and was finally dead. After some time, we see that Podong, Bell, and Hippo were trying to wake up Xavier, who was passed out. When he wakes up, he sees the monster was defeated. He was impressed by Lloyd for keeping his word, but Podong and the others were crying and trying to make him follow them. Xavier understands what they were trying to do and follows them. When he arrived where they were taking him, he was baffled and shocked. Lloyd was lying dead on the ground. There was no life in his eyes. When Xavier checks his heart, he was even more devastated as it had stopped beating.